Hi, my name is Niki. This is The Interventionalist. And today I really want to talk about the experience of a homoerotic friendship or experiencing homoerotic friendships when you're gay or growing up queer, and particularly in the closet. And also, sort of the experience or the struggle with being able to tell the difference between platonic connection and attraction versus romantic connection and attraction. And I feel like that's something I've talked about quite a lot on my TikTok, but I think part of the reason, because it sounds kind of silly, right, to be like, I don't know the difference. How do you tell the difference? But when you're growing up in a culture that ingrains in you the idea that the sex or the gender that you're going to feel romantic and sexual attraction for is this group. Like for me, it was men, and whatever I feel towards women will only be categorized as platonic, because I was given these categories and they're super ingrained, and I grew up in a really traditional area, so it was really heavily ingrained. And so I just assumed whatever feelings I had towards men, good or bad, or in general, those are the categories it would fall into. So if I went on a date with a guy, no matter what I actually felt, I was categorizing the feelings as attraction because I was told that's what you experience. And then whenever I felt for women, even when it felt like, oh my God, this is crazy, and I know this is more, I can't understand why it's so intense, I would just be friendships are just really intense and codependent and kind of maybe insane, really intense. And when you're growing up, I think it takes a lot of deconstruction and also relearning how to approach romantic attraction, particularly because even if you start to be able to tell the difference, right? You grow up, you come out of the closet, and now you've sort of accepted it and know that you are interested in this other sex, for me, women, it can still be difficult to know how to necessarily act on those romantic feelings. And I think also to behave sometimes in a way that is romantic versus platonic, because you're raised in an environment and a culture where that's the interactions you've only ever experienced with women, or been told it's okay. So you've never behaved in a way that would be considered romantic, that would cross the, not cross, that sounds bad, but maybe cross the line into romantic, pursuing someone romantically or showing romantic interest. And then also, I think a lot of the way that we develop an understanding of how to navigate relationships, or how to flirt with someone, how to hit on someone, things like that. If you grow up only seeing mostly in media, if maybe even only in media, heterosexual relationships, and the way that those, I guess, sort of navigated, or the script that they tend to follow related to gender roles and gender norms, but also just if that's what you're exposed to the most, you're already associating and kind of know what it'll look like when a man is attracted to you or romantically pursuing you, and kind of the role that you should take and how you should respond to it, because it's been painted for you. So you kind of don't really have to think about it the same way, because you know, okay, that's what they're doing, that's what this means. Even if you don't totally know how to return it because you don't feel the same thing, you at least probably intellectually know how you need to respond to it, and you know what it'll look like coming towards you. And when it's the same sex, when you don't have a guide, you don't have something to look at, it's really hard to know how to approach it, especially because you're already actively having to deconstruct and unlearn I just heard my washer go off, my washing machine, but you already are having to unlearn and deconstruct the very heavily ingrained idea that you can only behave platonically, and also sort of the instinct and intuition to behave platonically in someone of the same sex, because that's how it's always been. So that comes natural to you. And also there's a kind of friendship that can occur between two people of the same sex that were raised the same way, because there's just kind of a mutual understanding. I think a sense of camaraderie, probably a sense of safety, especially when it's for example, two women, there's usually an understanding and a sense of safety that can come with that. I also think it's potentially even a little bit evolutionary, learning the people you can trust and the people and communities that will most likely be the most safe for you and make you feel the most accepted. And you know, you're probably going to feel a lot more comfortable immediately when you're with a queer person or in a room full of queer people versus straight people, just because these are your people. And the same goes for people of the same sex, or, if you're two women, two guys, whatever. And I think because of that, it can also be difficult because there's already that like specific kind of friendship. You probably can have that experience like right off the bat. And then you almost are like naturally kind of friend zoning each other. So you have to make the move to push it romantically, to like cross the platonic barrier. And I think there's so many reasons why it can be nerve-wracking and uncomfortable because, for example, like if you're a woman, if you're raised a woman, you know what it's like most likely to be objectified, sexually harassed, all these very uncomfortable things associated with romance, sexuality, like sex, all this stuff. And so I do think, and I've talked to a lot of lesbians who also feel this way, there's also a barrier you have to get past where you are terrified of making someone uncomfortable the way that you know you've been uncomfortable. And they most likely have experienced that discomfort as well. And then having to push past that in order to not feel like weird or like you're being creepy just because you've always been told that maybe it's not even that you necessarily have always been told that it's creepy to be gay, but if you've been told that like you really shouldn't be gay and women will only want like men or that kind of idea, it can make you feel weird and kind of like, I don't know, this is a weird word to use, but like a little creepy or weird to then like pursue a woman that way or like flirt with her that way romantically, all these different ways, because you are crossing a barrier that like you've always been told you really should not cross. And then you're crossing a barrier that you know has most likely been crossed in an uncomfortable way already for yourself and that person you're with. Most likely they've already had that barrier crossed in a way that was really uncomfortable. So you have to get past the being like, am I fucking weird for trying to be gay? Like, am I weird for acting gay on a gay date where this person is also gay, you know? And then you also have to push past immediately inherently thinking that you're just going to be weird and creepy for like pursuing another gay person that way, you know? And obviously like that, you like read the room, you know, and intuit like what's happening. But I do think a lot of us probably still are able to do that and still can't get ourselves to push past or like break that barrier. And I think there's kind of like the running joke that if it's like femme for femme on a date, it's really hard to push past like the platonic barrier. And I think maybe that has to do with like being in a position where like men in particular, if that's who you've like been told will pursue you, that's going to be attracted to you, that script has always been they're going to be the ones to initiate. And so especially like if you're femme, because that's like kind of what you see with that script. That script is like masculine and feminine, or I guess like expression, masculine expression and feminine expression, gender expression. And because of that, I think then when you're in a position and like on a gay date, you not only have to like push past the platonic barrier because that already came so naturally that it's like, shit, we can't friend zone each other. Like I like you, like I want to be more than friends. Then you also have to push past maybe the discomfort of even like behaving in a gay way if you've sort of been told that's wrong and not how you should be, and then also being afraid to make them uncomfortable the way that maybe you have been in the past or you know that they most likely have experienced. And then also like have to deconstruct and push past like that script that you've always seen and realize that, okay, this is unscripted. Like I'm just gonna have to go for it and like write the narrative myself. And that can just be really difficult to do because you have no guidebook, and everything's a little bit more difficult when you don't have a guide, especially when you don't have a guide and it's already been told it's wrong. So making moves in any way to like develop your own guide and not see yourself as weird or it's wrong can be also really difficult. Anyways, this had me thinking about homoerotic friendships because in childhood, a lot of people I think who are queer experience a friendship that is, I guess the word is erotic, but that is more than a friendship. You have feelings more than a friendship. You're attracted to them most likely in a romantic way. You have a crush on them. But because you've been told that the only feelings you would ever feel towards this person or you're allowed to feel is platonic, can't clock the fact that these are romantic feelings. And because of that, the relationship, even though you might not recognize it, is different and often incredibly intense and kind of like overwhelming. And you're feeling all of these things that you don't understand because they're just your friend, but somehow it's different than any of your other friendships. And I think a lot of queer people, a lot of my lesbian friends I've talked to about this, will grow up and have like really intense, deep friendships with like someone of the same sex. Like I always had really intense, deep friendships with the girls that I was closest with. Like, I just thought it was normal, so deep that it's borderline codependent. And I would struggle. Like, I think this was a mutual thing, actually, the way we've all behaved, or like each of those relationships kind of behaved. It was like a mutual weird kind of possessiveness that I did not feel towards any other people. And I don't think any of my friends ever felt towards me. Like, I had a few different friends that when I was talking to someone, talking to like a guy, because I was, trying to be straight, they were so upset with me, like genuinely angry. They would get so upset with me. And I didn't understand, but I do know that I shared the same sentiment. I was just more quiet about it, but I would also feel that like intense jealousy, but I didn't understand why I was jealous. Like, for example, I had one of my like closest friends in high school. We had a really intense friendship, the kind of friendship where everyone already was asking if we were gay or making jokes that we were gay. And she was like super intense, and I think she was a little bit more intense than me, but we just had a really intense friendship. I also felt very attached to her, and I didn't really understand my feelings towards her because I wanted to be around her all of the time. I thought she was just like the most wonderful thing. I could just stare at her face forever. But she would get really upset if she thought I thought that I was like talking to someone, obviously a guy, because I wasn't out of the closet. And I remember one time we were in a classroom like for lunch, and she saw me texting this guy who had been my friend. I was a junior in high school at this time, and we had been friends since freshman year. There was nothing there. I did not like him in any capacity. But she saw me texting him, and she lost it. She got so mad. She got like red in the face. She was like, I don't understand why you're texting him. If you don't even like him anyways, what are you doing? Why are you texting him? She was 5'10", okay, mind you, and I am like 5'4" on a good day. And she ripped my phone from me in front of a bunch of people, and she held it above my head so that I couldn't grab it and I couldn't keep texting him. And above my head, she was like this. She starts texting this guy like crazy stuff, like really upset with him. And then he blocked me. And we were friends, and he did not block me for like 3 years. And then one day he unblocked me and he sent me a text. I don't even know what she said, because then she deleted the messages. So I know exactly what she said. She probably said some crazy, horrific things, because she was way more intense than me. Like, I think she had anger issues as well. So it was just very different. But it was that sort of very clearly we had an intense friendship. But I also was like, I don't know. I just had these crazy feelings for her. Like, honestly, when I look back now, I'm like, I think it was more than a crush. Like, I think my jar just went off. I genuinely think I was like probably in love with her. And that friendship ended terribly. I think a lot of homoerotic friendships, because they're so intense, when they end, you're already confused. You don't understand what's going on. So you're already like emotionally like overwhelmed and like all over the place. And when it ends, it tends to explode, because the larger your emotions towards someone are, like the heavier like the larger your attachment is towards somebody, the worse it's going to be when the relationship usually ends. Like, it's more difficult, I think, to end on good terms, just because when you feel so much towards a person, the loss of them stirs up so many feelings that I think it can be difficult to act in a rational way. But that's not why it ended in a terrible way. It ended in like a really terrible, horrific way. And we have not talked since I was 17. We were friends for like a year, and it was crazy intense. And I look back now and I'm like, holy shit, like I think I was like in love with her. And there were a couple other friendships in my life where I never as intense as her. And I think part of it is because after her, I started to kind of realize that maybe this was more than a friendship, and these are what these feelings might not necessarily be platonic. I think the reason I started to realize that is because I came out to her. She was the first person I ever came out to, and then the only person for like years. But once I came out of the closet, it like gave myself permission. I think when you come out of the closet, it gives you permission to think about your relationships differently and in a more open-minded, honest way. Because until you come out of the closet, you're most likely still kind of forcing yourself at the very least to categorize your feelings towards a specific group in one way. And so until you like allow yourself to really look at things in sort of like an equal way, like compare the feelings you feel towards each, and then like allow yourself to perceive the feelings you feel towards like the same sex to be something more than platonic, I think that's when you can start to really identify or realize that oh, maybe this can be more than platonic. And I think then you start to probably construct an idea of attraction in any way. But she was the first person that I ever came out to. And then a week after that, it ended horrifically. And part of it was, I think, because I came out to her. But she was the first person I ever came out to. And then she told me, she was like, well, I think I'm also bisexual. But I told her I was a lesbian. And we were always like crazy close. But she was like, well, I kind of already knew because the way you talk about women and the way you talk about guys, like, it's just not the same. And I think like kind of admitting it to each other that at the very least we were capable of having like romantic feelings, I think that caused it to kind of blow up. Because, I don't know, it just did, that realization, and then things got weird, and I think it's because we both knew, like, admittedly, we could have feelings like that for each other, and we had a crazy intense friendship already, and that caused, I think, it just ended really fucked up. But I've never forgotten that, because still to this day, it's, like, one of the most intense relationships I've ever had, and I'll never forget it for that reason. And even then, like, I've dated people that I am genuinely attracted to, and it honestly still, some people that I have dated, like, openly and honestly, like, with myself in regards to attraction, still haven't compared to the experience I felt towards someone that I had attraction towards, that I couldn't even, like, be openly honest with myself about or really truly identify them as those feelings. But I think part of it that makes homoerotic friendships so intense is because you don't understand what's going on, and when you don't know why you're feeling a certain way, it kind of drives you crazy. And then I think it makes you act in a little bit of, like, makes you feel crazy, like makes you act in ways that aren't really rational because you're trying to get a grip on your emotions and control on them. And I think sometimes homoerotic friendships can end up being quite dangerous because when you can't get a grip on your own emotions, you most likely are going to try and, like, control theirs. And if that's the case, it can lead to a lot of possessiveness. And I've also experienced that. I had a roommate in college that I was friends with who I think she felt that towards me, and it wasn't mutual, but it was really intense and really difficult. She was super possessive, and it just sucked because I wanted to be her friend, and I didn't understand why she was so upset with me all of the time if I hung out with anyone else, especially upset with me if she thought that I was talking to anyone else, if she thought I was just talking to a guy casually, like at a party. She'd get so upset with me. And a lot of my other friends were like, she treats you like a boyfriend. And I think that's when it gets unhealthy, is when, because you can't get a grip on your own emotions or you can't control how you feel because you don't understand, you'll try and control the other person as a way to sort of mitigate and control your feelings. Because I think when you feel like if you can control the external thing causing these emotions, because their behavior, whatever they're doing, is like causing emotions to arise in you, particularly because you feel things towards them that are way more than a friend, like maybe then it causes you to experience a lot of jealousy when they're, I don't know, dating or talking to someone else. And so you can't control the fact that you're feeling those things because it's just coming up. Like, you're just feeling attraction, and we can't really stop attraction from occurring. And it's difficult to navigate it when you can't even identify it that way. So I think as a result, it can cause you to try and control the person. And that will hopefully mitigate the way and the confusion and the destabilization that you're feeling. But then it gets really unhealthy. And I think that can be mutual in a homoerotic friendship. But I don't know, the friends I've talked to are also lesbians and have had this experience. It tends to be like one person is super possessive and the other isn't. But I'm sure it can definitely go both ways. And while, like, for me, for example, I didn't feel possessive necessarily, or I didn't act in a possessive manner towards, for example, the girl in high school, I definitely felt like just a really intense want to be around her all of the time. And like I would get like sad if that wasn't the case. I don't know if I would identify it as jealousy, or maybe that is like a side effect of jealousy. And she was, on the other hand, she was a lot more intense than me. Just, she was like a lot louder of a person, more aggressive of a person, and she was quite possessive. And so, I don't know, the dynamic was kind of interesting because we both had these really intense feelings for each other, and she was someone who kind of would bulldoze over people, and because she really wanted like control over me and to prevent me from like talking to other people, because I think she was overwhelmed with that jealousy. The way that I, especially at that point in my life, handled being attracted to somebody and like wanting to like have them in my life that way because I'm not attracted to them, I'll allow myself to be sort of bulldozed over because I want them to want me and like to stay in my life. So I don't really want to cause issues or conflict or confrontation because I don't want to risk ruining the relationship. And so I kind of become this people pleaser, and she was just the opposite. And so it caused like a relationship that, I don't know, it just wasn't good because I didn't know how to stand up for myself when she was being super possessive, like when she would hold my phone up above my head. And I still couldn't understand why a friend to me could bulldoze over me that way. And I couldn't get myself to like stop it because she meant so much to me. And other friends in my life that I had, that was never an issue. Like I was always good at setting boundaries and standing up for myself, and I didn't understand why it was different. But now I realize because I have dated and experienced attraction that I can identify and know is attraction, and the way I behave when that happens, or I have behaved in the past because I don't really behave this way anymore, I become pretty easily someone you can walk all over, or I had become like that, and definitely a people pleaser for the same reasons that I now I remember doing with her, and that's why I know it was more than friendship, because that's never been something I'm like in friendships. It's interesting too because every gay person I've ever talked to that relates to this always will recall that relationship, that friendship, as the most or one of the most intense relationships they've ever experienced, but the most impactful. Like I do think that friendship impacted me in a way that is sort of incomparable. And I think it's because when you have the added factor of not being able to act on these feelings, not being able to identify them, being told that they're platonic, I don't know. I think that added layer makes it so much more intense and as a result impactful, because you're so emotionally overwhelmed trying to regulate and understand all of these emotions, especially when you're experiencing things and feelings that you've never felt towards a friend, and you're feeling it towards a person that, even if you don't realize that's what it is, like maybe romantic, you're experiencing that intensity towards a person that you're not supposed to feel it towards, and you've never really, like you whether or not you're aware of it, I think even subconsciously, why you might start to freak out is because you might like subconsciously be aware that this is the way that these feelings are, the way that are something you've seen only between like heterosexual couples or in heterosexual relationships. So I just think that even if you might not realize that you can tell the difference yet, I think very deep down subconsciously there's probably some awareness that I think only contributes to the freaking out factor, and either causing you to like cling to this person more or feel this push and pull towards them. But all of that causes you to be more impacted by the relationship and more overwhelmed by it. This is why I think representation is so important in media, and especially for relationships, because you really do follow sort of a checklist and a guidebook that you can internalize from the things that you see. And if you never see something that looks like you, or what your relationship, or the kind of like, you don't see how a relationship plays out that looks like the one you have, it's really difficult to navigate it, and also then unlearn and like sort of deconstruct the particular influence that the relationship you always saw play out and the dynamic that you always saw play out, and not apply it to the relationship that you're in, because it's not a heterosexual relationship, it's a different relationship. And whatever dynamic you end up having, it's like you shouldn't go into it expecting to fulfill the script that you were heavily shown, and that was really probably ingrained in you, and that was most likely and probably always heterosexual relationships. And I think that's why it's just so important, because it's really difficult to navigate things without any kind of script. Even if you end up going off script, like for a relationship, it's just way more difficult when you have no frame of reference. And I think it can cause you to act in ways that maybe you otherwise wouldn't, or to seek out things you otherwise maybe wouldn't want to seek out, just because you're still trying to kind of mimic the script you always had, because you don't know any other one. Like I've talked about on here quite a few times, but the way that I have struggled with sort of applying heterosexual dynamics, but more so like misogynistic, very like traditional heterosexual dynamics to my relationships. And now that I've like grown and sort of gotten to know myself, I realize I don't really relate at all to that dynamic, or it's not what I want at all. But I really struggled with, for a long time, applying them to my relationships or seeking out people who would sort of role play what I had always seen. And it usually ended up being quite a toxic thing, just because the people that I would end up seeking out were quite misogynistic, because I think that's kind of what I just always saw growing up. I have a video about misogyny and like queer desire that talks about that more, but learning how to not apply those dynamics immediately and inherently to the queer relationship that you're in, so that you can at least freely write your own script and fluidly, is so important, no matter what the dynamic ends up looking like. Maybe it looks more heteronormative. I've talked about how that's not an inherently bad dynamic. It's the heterosexual institutions and heteronormative oppressive institutions that like really make you believe that's your only option and oppressing you if you don't adhere to that. It's not being in a relationship that mimics the idea of like, oh, a more feminine, like a more feminine expression and a more masculine expression. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It's the institutional aspect and the oppressive aspect on like a systemic level. But it's important, I think, to be able to enter into a relationship and have the capacity to not immediately apply what you've always been told is how a relationship should look, which comes with a lot of deconstructing your idea of relationships and the way that you conceptualize relationships and dynamics and behaviors and expectations of yourself. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. I don't know. I was thinking a lot about homoerotic friendships today, just because I was kind of laughing about the way that I had no idea that that's what they were. And when I look back now, I'm like, holy shit. Like, I liked this like person or these people so much more than I think I've liked a lot of people that I actually have gone out with, being out of the closet, and the way that it just kind of is, it's crazy. It's a really intense, crazy experience. But if anyone watching this has had a similar experience, has like had a homoerotic friendship of their own, or just like experienced the confusion between recognizing platonic and romantic attraction, I would love to hear it, because I think it's so interesting, and everyone has their like very particular experience with it, and I just always find them so interesting to read. And I always like kind of look back, and even though like that relationship ended terribly, it always makes me kind of laugh, just knowing like, oh my god, that was so obvious. But it's just not obvious when you're not out of the closet. So if anyone has like an experience that relates to this, I would love to hear it, like whether it's like in the comments. But I also, the way that I end this is I have a website you can send submissions to, or to my email, which is down below. And if you have an experience with this that you would want to share, but you don't really want other people to see it, you can send it to me. And not just this, you can send me anything, like whatever it is that you really want to talk about, or that you feel like you need to talk about, whether it's just like your thoughts on something, an opinion, or like something that's heavy on your heart. Always feel free to send it, whether it's through my website or through my email. I would love to read it. I'd be honored to. And if you want to upload it to the website for other people to see and maybe connect with, I'm happy to do that. And if you also just want it between us, that's wonderful too. And yeah, if you want to share something or share your experience that relates to this, I would love to hear it, however you would want to share it. And yeah, I guess that's it. I make TikToks and Instagrams, and I post on Instagram, and those will be down below if you're interested in going and watching the videos there. I also have a Substack that I just started, which I'm posting writing on, which is down below if you want to read those. And I upload these to Spotify if it's something you just want to listen to. And yeah. Okay, that's it. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.